Over my career, I witnessed 5 or 6 different crises. Some of them were quite severe. They were all financial in nature. We were all able to mitigate these crises and reduce the severity through monetary policy. In most cases, the duration of these crises were short in nature. When you start thinking about the climate change impact, we don't have a global government body to arrest this problem. This is going to require every government, small and large, to start finding ways of mitigating it.
The year was 2009, and after a disastrous couple of years that began with a mortgage crisis and resulted in the losses of massive amounts of capital by financial institutions everywhere, Rob Kapito went to the newly rebuilt Yankee Stadium. As the economy was in a complete state of disarray, many Wall Street investors were there for a welcome distraction. But Rob Kapito was on a mission. His employer, the investment group BlackRock, had deployed Kapito to locate Bob Diamond, the chief executive of Barclays Capital. The bank had acquired the U.S. parts of Lehman Brothers, but the weight of the deal was sucking Barclays down the drain, and the bank was desperate. It needed to sell off its asset management arm, Barclays Global Investors, and Kapito was there to secure it for his boss, BlackRock's chief executive. Soon, the $13.5 billion deal was sealed and announced, and BlackRock was on the way to becoming the largest asset manager on Earth, guided under the watchful eye of its chief executive, Larry Fink. With his deal done, Fink would begin his rise to become the king of the U.S. economy, with stakes in almost everything. This is how he became the most powerful man in finance. Lawrence Douglas Fink was born on November 2, 1952, to his Jewish family in Van Nuys, California. His father was the owner of a shoe store, and his mother was a professor of English at California State University. In 1969, the Flower Power movement was in full swing, with one of California's first attempts at cultural revolution resulting in new music, new art, new writing, and new poetry. It's not hard to see why Fink was something of a dreamer, not really paying attention to anything enough to really succeed. He was one of those young people in the revolution.
At 10 years old, I was required to learn how to sell shoes and help my father. Well, I learned how to deal with people pretty early in my career. It was a great learning lesson, how to deal with people, how to appeal to people's needs, and I was a pretty good shoe salesman.
As Larry was not as academically excellent as his older brother, he had to help out at his father's shoe shop, and he found his way into a political theory degree at UCLA eventually. His goal was to make a splash by becoming a politician, but instead, he ended up on Wall Street. After he graduated from university, Fink took a job at a leading investment bank, First Boston, as a bond trader. Bonds were only beginning to be actively traded in the 70s, and Fink was excellent at his job. In no time at all, Larry had risen through the ranks and been appointed a manager, but not just a manager, the youngest manager in the history of the department. He saw the massive potential of computers over the course of the 70s and realized that they were absolutely the future, especially when it came to allowing the dissection of cash flow regarding mortgages. The profitability of First Boston was huge as the 80s began. Of course, the 70s was also a dismal year of depression, with only the exception of Star Wars released to provide any joy to the people. By the 80s, though, the decade of inflation and economic stagnation ended with the appointment of Ronald Reagan to the presidency. Reagan had big plans for restoring economic prosperity to the United States, and his plan, Reaganomics, was a controversial one. Reagan would cut taxes, deregulate Wall Street, and create the right ecosystem for new ideas in finance. Mortgage-backed securities played a huge part in this. In essence, this was the purchasing of mortgages and the turning of them into securities that could be traded by investors. And the innovative new economic stimulus was spearheaded by, among others, Larry Fink. First Boston profited hugely from this new innovation, and Fink had brought the firm to the pinnacle of the investment banking world. He was able to generate over $1 billion in profit for the company, and he himself quickly became the most profitable man at First Boston. However, when you've reached the top of the mountain and achieved vast wealth and success, it's easy to believe your own hype. You might start believing that you're untouchable. No one is, though, and in 1986, disaster struck for Larry Fink, as he lost $100 million in one quarter. It was the year before the Black Monday crash, and no one was prepared for such an event. On Wall Street, you're only as good as the last win or loss you incurred, and Fink's reputation plunged. Whereas before, Larry was the cream of the crop, the golden goose as it were. Now he was being sidelined, kept away from the frontier, and lost a lot of allies. Fink knew it was time to move on, but with his reputation in tatters, he knew that he wouldn't have an easy time finding a new job. Larry Fink was unemployed at 36 years old in 1988, jaded and wondering what he should do next. As he is a fiercely competitive person, Fink had no desire to give up and just lose everything, including his reputation. No, Larry Fink would get his previous glory back, no matter what it took. This time, he was sure the right way to go would be to start his own business, but he would need investors in order to do that, and he had a scathing reputation. His fortunes would change soon, though, when he happened to meet a man named Steve Schwartzman. Schwartzman was one of the most powerful men on Wall Street and had recently founded Blackstone. The young company still did not have the reputation as a consulting firm yet, though, and just like Larry Fink, Wall Street had cashed Schwartzman away after a nasty power struggle at Lehman Brothers had ended him with being forced out. Schwartzman was an ambitious person, just like Fink, and was considering expanding Blackstone into wealth management. Fortunately, Schwartzman was nothing if not talented at identifying other talent, and he wanted someone he could rely on to run the operation. He needed to find someone that he would call a 10, someone who can identify problems ahead of time, solve them, and make sure they don't come back. He was looking for Larry Fink. After finally meeting Fink, Schwartzman decided to embark on a joint venture, which he would call Blackstone Financial Management. He invested $5 million for Fink to start the management company, and suddenly, Fink had everything that he needed, except the money for the fund. Working hard by the early 90s, Fink had amassed $8 billion under management. Because of what had happened to him in the 80s, Fink had learned about risk management and had learned never to assume victory again. He adapted a new policy that he would never invest unless the risk was understood and prepared against. Unlike his peers, Fink would rely heavily on statistics and algorithms to prepare against risk, something that would come to put him back on top, as Blackstone saw enormous profits. The thought was then, what to do next to expand? Fink reasoned that he would have to offer more stock options to build a team of talented people. Unfortunately, Schwartzman, an inveterate investment banker by nature, rejected the idea of relinquishing any ownership. Both men were strong thinkers, fueled by the will to win, and when two men like this work together, clashes are inevitable. Fink knew it was time to leave and find a buyer for the ownership. The knowledge that Fink was shopping around for a buyer and wanted to leave reached Schwartzman during a difficult period of divorce, and he did not take kindly to the news. Fink, however, had found the buyer. PNC Bank was a firm that was buying across the board in the early 90s, and they offered hundreds of millions of dollars to acquire Blackstone's stake. In the face of such an overwhelming offer, Schwartzman couldn't ignore the money and agreed to sell the asset management business to PNC. It did not go well for him, and he didn't consider just how gigantic this business could become. BlackRock, the business, was sold to PNC, but it was still small. However, Fink now had complete control over the company and would not hold back. He needed an advantage, though, an edge on the competition, and he found it in a place no one would have predicted. General Electric, or GE, had exploded in business and wealth since the 80s, expanding into new businesses like news and finance, and bought Kidder, Peabody and Company, but after the formerly respected company was found guilty of insider trading and fraud, it was put up for sale to whomever would take it. Payne Weber answered the call, but refused to take the spoiled bond portfolio of $10 billion in CMOs. Despite GE's best efforts to rid themselves of the Peabody assets, no one wanted to do business with them, except Larry Fink and BlackRock. Fink was, of course, one of the pioneers of CMOs, and he knew how to handle them. His amazing team of analysts worked for weeks to evaluate the Peabody assets and repackage them, and BlackRock successfully helped GE to offload the assets, with minimal losses made all around. This kind of financial engineering became just the edge, just the advantage that Larry Fink needed to turn BlackRock into a titan. From that point on, word spread that if you had something strange in your portfolio, Larry Fink was the guy to take it on. In just 3 years since separating from Blackstone, BlackRock had amassed $46 billion in assets under management. It was going so well that PNC decided to merge its own wealth management division with BlackRock, resulting in the company managing almost $150 billion in assets. Fink had become a billionaire, and by the time BlackRock went public in 1999, it had become the fifth largest publicly traded asset manager in the United States. Fifth wasn't good enough for Fink, though. Of course not. He wanted pole position. In the 5 years that followed, BlackRock would total over $400 billion in assets and become an unstoppable monster with only the desire for more growth. However, his old strategies were about to explode in everyone's faces. In 2000, Congress passed the Commodity Futures Modernization Act, banning the regulation of derivatives. Investment banks everywhere made billions through securitization, linking buyers, lenders, banks, and investors together. Passing the risk around and collecting the profits is not a good idea, though. With anyone able to get a mortgage, property prices soared, but all bubbles inevitably must burst, and in 2008, as we all know, that's exactly what happened. Stocks plummeted and banks failed, beginning with Bear Stearns, and the U.S. government had no choice but to ask J.P. Morgan Chase to bail them out. Jamie Dimon, JP's CEO, is not a man who wants to inherit a ton of risk. However, and so he got on the phone to Larry Fink to ask him for advice. As it happened, Fink was already talking to Tim Geithner, who was orchestrating the deal, which would normally be a conflict of interest, but not where Larry Fink is concerned. Larry Fink had become the entire banking ecosystem's fixer, the guy to call when you need catastrophes fixed. As a result, almost every deal that took place in response to the financial crash of 2008 involved BlackRock in some way. Working with the most powerful bankers on Wall Street, Larry Fink engineered the rescue of the banks, and with everyone depending on him, Fink was able to secure his position, rising to become the new emperor of Wall Street.
People don't understand demand has not changed that much. The reality is we have supply problems because of supply chains and all that. Obviously, we have the Russia-Ukraine war that aggravated this even more. And then we had just a monstrous sum of monetary policy and fiscal stimulus over the last few years. It's all leading to this really elevated inflation.
Okay, so but
this is all fixable.
After the 2008 housing crisis, everything had changed. Issuing and trading fixed income derivatives and had gone from a highly attractive model to one that was hated and scorned. This is without mentioning the other massive event that took place over the decade, the rise of the internet. With social media platforms on the rise, the ever-increasing speed of the internet, and the ability for information to flow like oxygen, Fink realized that this would impact the financial sector in an unprecedented way. He knew that the exchange-traded funds business would explode soon, and he was right. BlackRock had begun acquiring ETFs, beginning with Barclays Bank's iShares. Fink had come to the realization that the future of the investment world was to tap into the wallets of the smaller investors in much the same way that a hunter knows he will make more money by selling smaller animals, rather than trying to sell one big elephant. As a result of this shrewd way of thinking, Fink had led BlackRock to acquiring almost half the exchange-traded funds in the United States, and the company raised $103 billion in 2014 alone. This meant that BlackRock had become a major shareholder in virtually every publicly traded company that exists, and Larry Fink now sits atop an empire. Larry Fink has gone from one of the worst mistakes in Wall Street history, tarnishing his name and reputation, to becoming the financial sector's fixer, to becoming the man with arguably more influence on the United States economy than anyone else in the world. He's like the J.P. Morgan of his era, but wildly more powerful. He is, quite simply, the most powerful man in finance. If you like this video, check out this next video, as you'll find it super interesting.